The information provided by Trading Forex Price Action to you does not constitute personal financial advice. The information provided is of a general nature only and does not take into account your individual objectives, financial situation, or needs. It should not be used, relied upon, or treated as a substitute for specific professional advice.
Hey guys, this is a weekly forecast for September 26th through the 30th of 2022. Okay, we'll start off with the Euro Yen pair.
Okay, this is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So since there's strong monthly long strength on this pair, created from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here, with a breakout and immediate break back in right here, creating normal short strength, however price coming right back up to that pivot high, thus creating strong long strength. And so in the long term, I'm long biased right back up to this pivot high right here. And moreover, on the weekly chart, since the last long trade that form was right here, and just last week there was a new weekly short trade that form right here, and I'm currently waiting for the lower confirmations to confirm this weekly bias. In the short term, I am neutral biased. Okay, let's talk entries. Alright, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by what's been happening on this pair for the last couple of months. So the last long trade that form was right here. And then about a month later, there was a week short trade that form right here. And so at this point, the bias was long. Or in other words, price is likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And that target was hit right here. And then that same week, another week short trade formed right here. And so again, the bias was long. But now price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And then moreover, the same thing happened again. Another weak short trade formed. And so the bias remained long again. Or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low right here. And that target was hit at this point. And just last week, there was actually a new short trade that formed right here. So the current weekly bias is dependent on the strength of this new short trade against that last long trade that formed over here. So let's go ahead and see what the price elements are that are providing short strength for this short trade, as well as long strength for this long trade. So let's go over to the monthly chart. Okay, so on this monthly chart, that weekly short trade formed in this area, while that weekly long trade formed in this area. Let's start off with the long elements. So first of all, we have this nice trend line right here, from this pivot to this pivot right here. Okay, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 touches on it. So it's relatively strong. And then moreover, we have two small gaps right here providing long strength. Let me show you the levels for that. So the upper level for this one is 129.44, while the lower level is at 128.49. And the second gap's upper level is at 127.77. And the lower level is at 126.73. Okay, so we have these three price elements that are providing long strength for that last weekly long trade. Now furthermore, what's providing short strength for that short trade is one mini gap right here and also a small gap right here. Let's go through the levels for that. So the upper level for this mini gap is at 143.75. And the lower end is at 143.47. And this lower gap's upper end is at 140.52. And the lower end is at 139.45. Okay, so going strictly from these price elements, it seems this weekly long trade is stronger than this short trade. Okay, and the reason being is that, first of all, there's two small gaps here providing long strength, as well as a strong trend line providing long strength also. While for the short trade, all there is this mini gap and an equal sized small gap providing short strength. Okay, but like always, the lower confirmations have the ultimate say in terms of these biases. So let's go ahead and see what's happening there. Let's go over to the 4-hour chart. Okay, so on this 4-hour chart, that weekly short trade formed roughly in these areas. And then immediately we got normal long strength confirmation from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here. See, we got a breakout, an immediate break back in, showing normal, long strength. However, within that week, price came right back down to that pivot low right here, where that normal long strength was created, and thus creating strong short strength and actually confirming that weekly bias to be short. So actually, this was a nice pullback right here for a short entry with that weekly bias, because the weekly bias stop loss level is right here. Okay, but that said, like I mentioned on the overview, this pair has monthly strong long strength on it. So I much rather take a long entry. And so at the current moment, although price may fall a little, simply due to the fact that the lower confirmations are confirming a short bias, I am actually looking for a long entry. So let me go ahead and show you what I'll be looking for. Let me zoom out. Okay, so try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now if price could eventually come back up to this trend line, break it out, and immediately break back in, creating normal short strength. However, price coming right back up to that pivot high to create strong long strength. Well, that would override the strong short strength confirmed at this level right here, and thus making that weekly bias into long. And in that case, I'll be willing to take a mid-row long entry. Now you want to remember, mid-row long entries are only done under the basis that there's overarching long strength, like in this case. So the stop loss will be put at the major pivot low, wherever it may be. Now in this hypothetical case, it is right here at this point, while its main target is at the weekly bias's main target level right here. Okay, so at the current moment, since the bias is confirmed to be short, we may get a little bit further fall down, and we're just going to have to see if we could get this strong long confirmation so we could take this long entry. Okay, and I'll keep you guys updated. All right, let's go on to the Aussie Yen pair. All right, if you're having trouble understanding what I'm talking about in terms of lower confirmations and weekly biases, please watch my price action trading course, for that course is designed to provide you necessary information so you can understand these forecasts. Okay, this is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So on this pair also, we have strong long strength confirmed from this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here, with a breakout and immediate break back in, confirming normal short strength. However, price coming right back up to that pivot high to override this normal short strength to create strong long strength. And so in the long term, I'm long biased right back up to this pivot high right here. And moreover, on the weekly chart, since there was a long trade that formed right here, and just this week we had a new short trade that formed right here, and at the current moment I'm waiting for confirmation for this weekly bias, and so in the short term I'm neutral biased. Okay, let's talk entries. Okay, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by what's been happening on this pair for the last couple of months. So there was a short trade that formed back in April right here. And then a long trade formed right here, which was stronger than this short trade. And so the bias was long, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And that main target was hit right here. And just this week, we have a new short trade that formed right here. So at the current moment, we're measuring this long trade against this new short trade for the weekly bias. So let's go ahead and see what the price elements are for both these trades. Let's go over to the monthly chart. Okay, so that weekly long trade formed right here, and the new short trade formed right here. Now the price elements providing short strength for the short trade is, first of all, this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Again, it's legitimate because it has more than 3 touches on it. And then moreover, we have these 2 small gaps right here providing short strength. Let me show you the levels for that. So the upper level is at 98.36. The lower level is at 97.56. The second gap's upper level is at 96.57. And the lower level is at 96.20. Okay, so these 3 price elements are providing short strength for that short trade. Now in this case, we also have some long strength provided from this gap right here that must be subtracted from the short strength created from these 3 elements. Okay, so let me show you that gap level. So the upper level is at 93.94. and the lower level is at 93.33. Okay, so the way you want to look at this is that since this gap right here is about the same size as this small gap up here, you just want to eliminate the short strength created from this first gap right here. So essentially it's only this small gap right here and this trend line right here that's providing short strength. Okay, all right, let's go on to the long strength. Okay, so we have these two gaps providing long strength for that long trade. Let me show you the levels for that. Okay, the upper level for this bottom gap is at 87.88 and the lower end is at 87.36. And this mini gap up here is 89.06 and the lower end is at 88.87. Okay, and once again, there's actually a short strength provided from this medium-sized gap right here. So let me go ahead and show you the levels for that. All right, so the upper level is at 91.45. The lower level is at 90.18. Okay, so the way you want to calculate this is that since this gap is about the same size of these two combined, you could pretty much eliminate the long strength provided by these two gaps right here. Okay, so at the current moment, going strictly from these price elements, that weekly bias seems to be short. Or in other words, price is likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high. Now that said, it's important to remember it's always the lower confirmations that confirm these biases. Now since this weekly bias just formed, we're going to have to see what the lower confirmations say about this in the coming weeks. And I'll keep you guys updated with that. But let's keep in mind the overarching directional strength on this pair. Now, like I mentioned on the overview, there's strong overarching long strength on this pair. So in this case also, I'd much rather have a long entry. So I want that lower confirmation to confirm a long entry, even if this higher time frame strength is saying that the weekly bias is short. Okay, but there's one caveat to this. So let me explain that to you. Let me just zoom out here. Okay, so like I mentioned on the overview, the strong long strength on this monthly chart from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here, right, with a breakout, immediate break back in and price coming up to that pivot high. Now the key thing I'm watching for is that now this type of long strength created on the higher time frames often are stopped by clean price patterns and moreover candlestick patterns on these higher time frames. Now at this point, the candlesticks on this monthly chart still seem to show slight long strength. However, that said, on the weekly chart, there is a clean wedge pattern that is forming. And again, clean patterns often precede a stop to these strong overarching trends. So I'll go ahead and show you that. Let's go to the weekly chart. All right, so on this weekly chart you're on this trend line from this pivot to this pivot. As you can see, we're getting a nice wedge pattern. So the only way I'll be willing to take a short entry against that overarching trend is, first of all, if this wedge pattern stays intact and starts creating an even cleaner pattern. And the other reason will be through candlesticks on these higher time frames, which at this point, even on the weekly chart, it still seems there's still slight long strength left in it. Now, if you don't understand how I use these candlesticks to measure strength, I slightly touch on that on lesson 2 of my beginner's course. So even if you're an intermediate trader, I recommend checking that out. Okay, so at the current moment, again, that last long trade was here and that short trade was here. And we're going to have to see for that lower confirmation to confirm which way this bias will end up. But as long as long strength is confirmed through current price, through these candlesticks on the higher time frames, and this wedge pattern does not hold, I much rather take a long entry along with that overarching long strength. Okay, so I'll keep you guys updated with this one also. Let's go on to the pound yen. Okay, this is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So because of this trend line breakout from this pivot to this pivot, again showing normal short strength, however price coming right back up to override that normal short strength and creating strong long strength. In the long term, I'm long biased, right back up to this pivot high right here. And more of on the weekly chart, a weekly short trade formed just this week. So at the current moment, I'm waiting for a new long trade to form on the weekly chart to measure a weekly bias. So in the short term, I'm neutral biased. Okay, let's talk entries. Okay, this is a weekly chart. So there was a short trade that formed in April at this point right here. Then about 3 weeks later, a strong long trade formed. And so the bias was long, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And that target was hit at this point right here. And then through this rangy price action right here, there were multiple daily biases that formed. And then just this week, there was a new weekly short trade that formed right here. And so at the current moment, I'm waiting for a new weekly long trade to form so I can measure the strength differential between the two to come up with the weekly bias. Okay, and I'll explain what's providing short strength for this weekly short trade along with the long strength elements when this long strength forms. Okay, so at the current moment, I'm just waiting for this new long trade to form. Now let me go ahead and explain to you which bias I'd rather have to form on this pair too. Let's go back to the monthly chart. Alright, so on this monthly chart again, like I explained on the overview, there was strong long strength confirmed at this pivot right here. So going strictly from this overarching long strength, I much rather have that weekly bias to confirm a long weekly bias I could trade along with this overarching long strength. So in that regard, it's very similar to what's happening on the Euro Yen and the Aussie Yen. However, on the pound yen's case, it is quite different because on this monthly chart, we are getting some price action that are starting to show a lot of short strength on the monthly time frame. Now, I know I didn't explain this completely on the lessons because it's more of an advanced technique. But basically, when you're trying to know just through candlesticks what current price is saying about the strength of the shorts and the long, is that you always want to look at the pivots. So by pivots, I mean here, here, here. And you don't want to pay too much attention to the price action in these consolidating areas. Now that said, if you look at this area right here, we got continuous 3 rejection candles right here. So that's showing a lot of current strength short on a monthly time frame, which is not happening on the Euro Yen or the Aussie Yen. So in that regard, although for the time being, I do want a long entry along with this strong overarching long strength, depending on what happens to current price on the monthly, weekly, and daily charts. And if I don't see some strong current price coming back in long, I perhaps may start looking for a short entry, assuming that this strong long strength has been overridden already, in which case price often just comes right back down to the pivot low where that long strength was created. Okay, but we're just going to have to see about this one. And again, for the time being, I'm still looking for a long entry.
Okay, so that's it for the weekly forecast. So most yen pairs are beginning to create their weekly biases. And like I always say, now is the time to begin choosing the pairs that you're willing to trade. Now this is with consideration to your account size, risk parameters, carryover interest, and so on. Because it's important to always be one step ahead of the market, not just in terms of analysis, but in terms of trade management and also trade mentality. And moreover, I posted lesson 2 of my price action trading course for beginners, which covers candlestick basics. But in the latter half of the lesson, I explained how to read price just using candlesticks, which is a topic I never covered before. So even if you're an intermediate trader, I recommend watching it. And you could just skip the first half of the lesson because the latter half covers how to read price with candlesticks. Okay, so I hope you guys have a great week, and thanks for watching, guys. Okay, bye.